My name is Sean Mahar, and my company is Sean E. Mahar & Associates, LLC. And I've been in business for several years here in Western Massachusetts. And I got my start when I first started studying for my master's degree a long, long time ago. And I fell in love with the field of communication. And I studied how animals communicate, how people communicate. I studied many forms of psychology and eventually developed some research that no one else had done on the planet. I met a now friend of mine who was the Dean of Arts and Sciences at the University of South Florida, and worked together for close to 10 years developing some core principles that pretty much changed the landscape for how we can improve communication. So our book is entitled Stop Wasting Words, for Leaders to Lead Through Conscious Communication. And it's very powerful, very effective. And I'm delighted that a company in Portugal found us. They were looking for somebody to help them advance their own strategic plans to improve communication throughout the organization and around the world. And so they invited me to give a talk in February of 2022. And the content of it is what we're going to be able to share with you today. So we are not going to be showing you the proprietary information, their strategic plan, their goals, their timetables. That would not be fair. But the content of the program applies to everybody. And I'm delighted to be able to share that with you today. Thank you.
Our words are tools, and if we were a mechanic or an electrical engineer and we brought a tool to do the job, if the tool didn't work, we would get a different tool. But in communication, if the tool doesn't work, we yell at the object for it not adapting to our tool. We need to be flexible when we are involved in communication. So thank you very, very much. I'd like to open with, this is my first slide supporting heart conversations, in that there's three sort of stepping stones. One is that heart conversations help us raise the bar on the quality of our relationships. It really makes a big difference. If we improve our ability to communicate more effectively, one of the things that I like to use is the concept of we need a core strategy to do that. So I've organized this to try and make it easier to remember and easier to take notes. So I have a particular talking point for each of the letters of C-O-R-E, and that will become very clear momentarily. Also, because we are becoming more conscious of communication globally, and because I've been more conscious of communication for a very, very long time, I'm continually amazed that whenever anybody wants to get better at anything, whether it be golf or whether it be some kind of science, we need to become more conscious of it in order for that to take place. Unconscious people cannot make progress. So this work that I've done in conscious communication dovetails beautifully with the work that you're doing on heart conversations. I also want to make an observation before I go to the first business slide, so to speak, which is that from studying communication for so long, I know that I speak at approximately 100 to 120 words per minute. I also know that all of you enjoy listening, if you had a choice with speed, when people talk between 140 and 200 words per minute. So I might be talking too slow for some of you. I invite you during the conversation to pick up your phone and Google some of the things that I'm talking about. Feel free to take active notes on these materials and not just passively record the things I'm saying, but do your own research as well, and I believe you'll come to the same conclusions that I have. So my focus is that you will be able to do some things when we're done today. First of all, inspire people. Good communication for me is infectious and contagious. And in your own community, I'd like you to realize the things that I'm saying have bearing on your work, despite the variety of kinds of work that you do. And people will come to you for support once you start communicating a little more clearly, a little more sharply and crisply. You're going to take a little bit of work to understand the concepts because I see the world differently than most people. There are very few people who approach the world the way we do, and I think that you'll find it valuable. It's also designed for you to be able to test it out real time with people in your family or at work, so you can verify the things I'll be presenting quite easily. In order to proceed with this, we have to recognize there's always stumbling blocks, speed bumps, and barriers, and I'll identify some of those and show you how we can get around them. Core to our success, yours and mine, are specific values that make sense, that help advance the whole concept of healthy and mindful communication. And lastly, one of our key focuses is using communication strategies to support more effective heart conversations. And one of those strategies will be the way we approach feedback. So this is my outline. I made reference to the word core. That's going to be the structure for the 4 major principles. At the end, we'll have about a 10 to 15 minute Q&A. If you have questions right now along the way, I invite you to use your chat button on the bottom of your screen. And they'll be recorded and they'll be tabulated for me to be able to review at the end of the session. So in terms of inspiration, I want to point out that it's been my experience, and perhaps yours as well, we learn best when we can learn with somebody. I know that many of you are in a room alone, but if we have a study buddy, we can learn better. It's very difficult to learn to dance by oneself, or for that matter, play any sport or get involved in any activity, because there's always a handoff, other people involved. So I'm going to invite you to find a study buddy. I want to invite you to practice the things I've talked about. They're practical, they're real life, and you'll find that they work, and that will reinforce your interest in using them. And at the end, I'll present some conscious communication strengthening exercises, some things that you can do every day to actually improve this work, because I'm laying down a foundation today, a foundation that you will be able to continuously improve once you get these basics done. So the first part here is inspiring people. I'm going to cover some material. I want you to share what you learn from me with other people. That act is more important than you sitting there and listening and taking notes. And I do invite you to work continuous improvement. The first C, compassionately grow your consciousness. Consciousness applies to everything we do that we want to get better at. And I have 5 references here that sort of underscore the value of conscious communication. Humility, first, how words are given meaning, and what the challenge of the stimulus response habits are, because we're all victims of our habits. How to express ourselves in ways that we pay attention to the other person, because expressing ourselves is not sufficient anymore. We need to know that our audience is getting what we're talking about. And lastly, our words can hurt people, and sometimes we're unaware of that. We need to choose words that are helpful, not hurtful, and we can only do that if we're more aware of what those choices are. So for humility, I want to point out that we know what we know, and we think we know a lot, and we really don't. And I have the what we know in a circle that's perforated, because what we know grows and shrinks every day. We're learning new things, and some stuff we know is leaking out. But we do not know that we do not know what we do not know. And that's hard to say, it's maybe hard to read as well. The concept is we are completely unaware of the things that we don't know, and therefore we can't get better at them. And there's always more that we don't know than what we do know. So anybody who ever disagrees with us, offers us feedback, has some recommendations, suggestions, I am always predisposed to being curious about how they see the world differently than I do, because that will help us all. So for that reason, I think we all need to be humble all the time. Meaning is a real challenge for me, because it wasn't until grad school a long time ago I found out that the meaning is not in our dictionaries. The meaning is defined by our receiver. So the sender may say, Sean, you're a good employee. I challenge you to try to improve something. The receiver may feel scared, closely watched, and threatened. The sender has to know how the receiver is processing what was said. Otherwise, the sender leaves satisfied and proud, and the receiver leaves threatened and scared. So we need not just to say things well, but to see how well those things register with the other person, because ultimately the receiver decides what things mean, not the sender. The stimulus response cycle is a pattern that plagues most of us in terms of habits. In fact, one of the ways this is often demonstrated in live classes, if one person pushes, the other person pushes back. It's without thought of any kind. We're proposing that there be a pause. Whenever a stimulus presents itself, something somebody says to me or an event that occurs, maybe somebody speaks about something that's not relevant during a meeting, I believe we benefit from pausing before responding and thinking not about what we want to say, but what we want to accomplish. And then we choose our words as tools to accomplish that. And part of that is respecting everybody's contribution. That needs to be part of our message back to people. So I recommend we find a way to pause and not be part of the stimulus response patterns. We also have, for lack of a better word, a romance with expressing ourselves. And let me just take a drink here. People enjoy talking. People talk a lot. People are satisfied because they've talked. I propose to you that our satisfaction needs to stop coming from talking and start coming from finding out how our words register with the people we're talking to. Like throwing a ball, expressing ourselves is useless if the ball's not caught and understood as intended. I believe we can no longer afford, in today's world, to be satisfied with what we've said without checking in to find out what it meant to the people that we're talking to. And the fifth one here, and I'm going to come back to these two a little bit later when I talk about strategy, is there's two words that are problematic in all languages. The word why often feels like an attack. And the word why may not be intended that way. That is how most people feel it. And that's largely because as children, when their parents wanted to scold us, they would say, why did you do that? Why did you take out the garbage? Why didn't you do the dishes? Why is this taking so long? Why haven't you done your homework yet? Whatever it is. So our first introduction to why was from a power person talking down to us. And the word but has a tendency to get in people's faces. So I heard what you said, but I disagree. And so the extent that we become conscious of the impact of these words, we will choose other words. And when we get to the strategy part at the end, I'll explain what those options are for you. But I recommend we try to reduce the word count on these two words as a magical improvement in communication. For part two of the core word, I want to talk about compassionately growing conscious communication. This is my review. So we've talked about humility. Everybody has their own personal dictionary. We need to pause. We need to separate ourselves from words that don't work and find other words, and then replace whys with help me understand, and replace buts with and, simplistically, but I will come back to those. So here's a question right now. Which of these questions is a more effective example, from what I've said so far, of a heartfelt conversation? First choice, you have a good idea, but it will take too long. Again, hint, you have a good idea, but it will take too long. Second option, you have a good idea, and I think it will take too long. So please see if you can vote on this Slido slide. Thank you. Thank you very much. I sure feel better right now. Now, before I turn the slide, it's important to realize that short-term memory is short-term. This is hard to do, easy to understand, but difficult to do. I think I saw some people chose the B answer. And it's growing. Okay. Yep. So I will work on being more persuasive later on when I talk about the strategic part of this. And the second question, which I see you've all answered, help me understand is far better than why. Thank you very much for participating in this. Yeah, we're going to keep that second question low. Let me move to the O part of core, overcoming barriers. My goal here is to walk through some barriers and show you the reasons that they're barriers and ways that we can overcome them. This will be relatively quickly because presentation, because this stuff works. And again, this is something you may want to look up and take notes about and do further research on. So I've got some images, some perceptual errors, a Dunning-Kruger effect, which a lot of people are unaware of today, a myth about repeating back, and this relentless desire to blame other people, which I've seen in countless organizations. This is an image. It's under the heading of double images or figure ground images. Generally, when we see this image, we tend to see something pop on the screen. And for you, that may be a rabbit, or it may be a duck. But whatever we see, the problem with perception is we stop looking for more. We settle for our first impression and we act on that. And one of my major points here is that there's always more going on if we maintain our level of curiosity. It's not just the first thing we see. If you don't see both, I think you'll have another opportunity to go over these later. This image is called in the industry the king and queen. Your attention may first go to the vase, or it may go to the two people facing each other. And if it goes to two people facing each other, can you push further with your attention? Look harder, become more conscious of what you see, and see that the two faces are different. Hence the concept of this as the king and queen. This, I think, goes back to the 1930s and 40s, one of the first images of this kind. People tend to see this as either a younger woman or an older woman, depending upon how they look at it. And once they see it, they tend to lock into what they see. And in some cases, even have arguments with other people about what they see. And so, this works as a physical image for people to see the variations that are possible with perception. And we need to look harder at what we see. It's my last image. And when I use this image in live audiences, people often protest that I've got a double image here. But this is a wood carving. It's a real wood carving with real shadows. It's a real 3D image. And if I take this wood carving and ask you what you see, it's very difficult to make out. In the hundreds of times I presented this, there's only one person who was able to identify what this object is until I turn it over. When I rotate it, this is the other image that's visible. And because you've looked at the previous image, this might be harder to see. And I am not using a different picture. It is the same picture, just upside down, looking at it from another point of view. So seeing things from other people's points of view is tremendously informative and useful. So for you today, I want to show you both of them side by side. And so we have a beautiful deer with leaves and vines around it, or we have a wood carving done by an amateur that makes no sense. In either case, the image is understandable when we see it from other points of view. Second category of error is perceptual errors. This is an old story about what happens when a group of blind people touch an elephant and what do they see? One person touches the tail and sees a snake. One person touches the leg and feels a tree. And so our perception is what prevents us from seeing the big picture. There are 5 types of perceptual error. And I'm just going to stay on this slide for a little bit to do that. One is that based on our experiences, our life experiences, we tend to perceive things a certain way. And we think that that way is reality. My challenge and invitation to you is to think of that as a first impression and to always look for more. So our perception is initially selective. And the second step occurs inside our brains. Our memory of what we saw is also selective. So if we thought we saw the duck, every time we remember it, we're going to see the duck first and deny that the rabbit exists. So I need to acknowledge for myself that both my perception and recall are selective. I need to push what else could be going on. The next two also go together as a pairing. There's a halo effect where you went to the same school I went to. You must be a nice person. And then all of my conclusions are based around that. Or you have blue eyes, or whatever it is. It's a halo effect. We generalize from what we know. Again, we take an initial impression and we lock on it. We don't keep looking. The pitchfork effect is the reverse. You went to a school, let's say a graduate school, that turned my application down. I don't like you anymore. But I need to set that aside. Otherwise, no matter how the interview goes, the feedback session goes, the performance review goes, there's a part of me that holds you in negative valence, a pitchfork effect, because of something absolutely irrelevant. So in both those cases, we need to let go of those first impressions and pay attention to what's really going on in the interest of the other person and for our success in a heartfelt communication. The last perceptual area there is projections. We tend to project upon other people our own values. If you say that you are in favor of such and such a cause, and I like that cause, then I will project we agree about the kind of food we like or the kind of sports we like. I start projecting all these things because I'm unaware that this projection thing is a risk to our perceptual accuracy. If I find out that you support a particular cause, I need to say, okay, you support that cause. I'm curious, and I'm not going to jump to conclusions about other things in your life. So let's move on to our business now without carrying that projection further into the conversation. These are common errors. They're relatively easy fixes, but they're difficult to do. Third perceptual problem is named after the authors, the Dunning-Kruger effect. Please feel free to, as I said, I talk a little bit slower than most people have patience for, so feel free to look this up if you want. This is the best picture I have of it. It's a bias that says, if I don't know much about something, for example, true story, my lawnmower wouldn't start. Several people told me how to fix it and what was wrong with it, okay? So I thought, this isn't hard. How hard can it be? I went on YouTube, I looked up lawnmowers, I watched a video for fixing what I diagnosed was wrong with it. 3 hours later, I put all the pieces in a box and brought them to a small machine mechanic to put back together again. I thought I knew how to fix it. I knew nothing about it. And so in the beginning of the Dunning-Kruger effect on the timeline at the bottom, when I know nothing, I have a diluted sense of competence, an exaggerated sense, because I don't know how hard it really is. And the authors refer to that as the peak of Mount Stupid. And only as I begin to learn about the complexities do I become capable of understanding how it works. And then I'm finally able to predict how long it takes. This allows one person to say, oh, that's not hard, because they don't know what's involved. So whenever anybody disagrees with me, my response is always humble curiosity. You must know more about this than I do. So please share. Not, oh, I know, it's a short time. So it's a fascinating problem affecting perception. It happens in all countries. And it just blows my mind that I see this happen so often. This repeat back myth contributes to almost 250,000 deaths in the United States of America related to healthcare. It's one of the pieces that drive that. Many organizations in healthcare teach that when giving medications, when calculating doses, when giving assignments to patients being discharged, it's absolutely urgent and compelling to have them repeat back exactly what was said to make sure they understand. Make sure they repeat it back exactly. So if I give you a sequence of numbers, I'm just going to repeat a couple of these. Like I say, repeat back 3, 9, 6, 7, 4. And you repeat back 3, 9, 6, 7, 4. I will feel satisfied. That satisfaction is a delusion. It's not real. Because repeating it back perfectly inhibits long-term memory. Point in case, when I looked this up, and I invite you again to check this out, I found 7 species of birds that repeat back any sequence of words or numbers flawlessly in any language with no recall. Repeating back does not mean recall. There's one skill human beings have that no other animal on this planet has, which is the ability to paraphrase in our own words. So if I repeat back 3, 9, 6, 7, 4 as 3, 9, 6, 7, 4, I have paraphrased, I've changed the pacing, I've changed the sequence. And not only have I done that, I've increased my ability to remember those numbers and increased your ability to double check as I say it, because I'm saying it a little bit differently. So you're giving me more attention. With all this stuff, I buy on credit cards, stuff like that. There've only been a few people who actually read back my credit card this way by changing the sequence from a 4-number repeat to a 3-number repeat, or even saying 39, 67, 4. The important thing is, when somebody varies it a little bit, that is what is creating longer-term memory and comprehension. Repeating back exactly results in deaths because it doesn't get to long-term memory. Only human beings can paraphrase, and there's value in that. So in discharging a patient, asking them to repeat back exactly what I said doesn't help them remember what they need to do to take care of themselves or their children. When asking somebody to fix a machine and telling them how to do it, repeating back exactly doesn't tell me they understand how to do it. Asking them to summarize in their own words is a much better indication of that success. The last one here is just very simple. Too often, people want to blame other people. Now, I'm old enough to have a couple grandchildren. One's 2, and one is 2 months old. And my daughter, their mother, is very aware that I've been teaching this stuff for a long time, and it's beautiful to see support for children. But I think too often, kids learn to blame as a way of not being personally responsible. And they get that at home, they get that in grammar school, high school, and college. And it's never about blaming. It should always be about understanding. And so anytime you may feel an urge, well, it's not my fault, just say to yourself, it must be my fault. I must have contributed to it because I was in the room when it started. So use curiosity always instead of blame. So I was once asked during a live presentation, how many times a week should I give recognition and praise instead of blame? And my answer was, that is the wrong question. The right question is, how many times a day will I give recognition and praise to everybody? We've got to flip that over so that we're more supportive, because support encourages more support. Heartfelt conversations create more heartfelt conversations. Thanks again for participating in this Slido program. I'm curious, and I'm honestly curious about this. Which one of these appeared to resonate the most with you? Which one of these was most useful or interesting? And I'll give you a couple minutes to plug in your answers. Thank you. So far, I have 4 responses. Looking at 71 responses. I believe you can all see this on your screens. All right, we have some balance here. This is very useful real-time feedback for me, because all of these other perceptual errors and effects begin with figure ground, begin with what do we see in the first place and do we come to conclusions about it. So that's fascinating. I obviously didn't focus on that well enough, or I think it would have been more balanced, but this is very useful information. I want to thank the 240 of you who have clicked on this. It's extremely helpful. Very, very helpful. All right. Thank you again. In review, I talked about overcoming barriers, identified 5 of them, and gave you a quick high-level review of them and some of the ways around them. Next section is, what do we do now in light of these barriers, in light of our goals, to improve our successful heart conversations? And my word for that is becoming more conscious about how our conversations are working. There's 5 reinforcements, and this is the only slide I'm going to use for this particular piece that support this. And these are our values. I want to talk about compassion for just a moment. Compassion is not just a word. The meaning of compassion lies with every single person I talk to about compassion, from their experience as a leader, their experience as a follower, their experience as a team member. Our experience helps understand what compassion looks and feels like. And a lot of that experience came before we even started going to school. So our parents have influenced how we experience and feel what compassion is. So we can talk about compassion by talking about empathy, how we're connected to other people, how we are present in the present with other people, as opposed to talking to people as if reading scripts we prepared, but actually engaging with people. And so compassion is a powerful supporter of heart communication. Second value here is collaboration. When I'm collaborating with you, hopefully you feel that I'm being helpful. You also feel that we're mobilizing around common goals and benefits. You feel that we're working together, that there's an opportunity for us to feel success. Collaboration has tons of joys built in around what that success looks like. Hopefully we're patting each other on the back, not grossly, not to the distraction of getting done our work, but I know in this group, when I'm collaborating, if I say something that is a wild, crazy, stupid idea, nobody's going to shoot me down for it. We're going to say, okay, that's a good try. Let's try again, because we're all on the same team. Collaboration is a very powerful facilitator of heartfelt conversations. I've also learned it's important to be vulnerable. And I want to make a confession here. When I first got my master's degree, I thought I knew everything. It was like Dunning-Kruger effect. And I knew so little about what was going on in the world. And I learned very quickly that the truth was I'd only learned a window on the world, not actually all the knowledge in the world. And so I've learned over and over and over again about the need to be vulnerable to being wrong, vulnerable to being enlightened about other things that I don't know about, and being accessible and being committed to my own development, which is why I continue studying almost every day. I keep learning things, and it's a hoot. In fact, in the interest of vulnerability, I learned something right now today about feedback I didn't know. And I'm going to come back to this a little bit. But in Japan, my co-author wrote me a note this morning saying, engineers are designing the highways with codes on them so that when you drive down the road at the speed limit, you get to hear the music of the road. It plays music for you. And if you're going too slow or too fast, it doesn't play music. They've built in something into the system to enable people to get real-time feedback for enjoying their speed, as opposed to putting more cops out with speed traps to give people tickets. It's making use of feedback. So I'm always vulnerable and appreciative of learning new things. And these are all connected to humility. One of my friends said that we have a choice in life. It was actually in one of my Gestalt training programs, Gestalt psychology training was. He said, we all have a choice. We can be humble or be humiliated. It's a simple choice. So let's choose to be humble and act accordingly. And the last one here I want to bring up is authenticity. We need to be authentic in all that we do, but authentic isn't just a word. It involves being legitimate, being credible, being real, being sincere. All these other images show up here when we are present with each other and authentic with each other. So that means instead of, to preview the feedback piece, instead of saying, look, you're not doing a good job on this, and I'm worried about you, I would move that up and say, I'm concerned that I don't think you're doing a good job, but I'm not sure. I might be wrong about that. So let's talk about this particular work. And on the other side of that, you're doing a great job, but more authentically says, I'm really proud of the job that you're doing. I'm impressed. I'm putting myself into the conversation instead of just throwing labels at the other person. So a large part for me of authenticity is being present with the other person. These are the verbs I talked about. They are a source of power for our conversations. We can practice them. We can look them up online and learn more about them and pursue them. We're now in the strategy part. And I'm going to probably spend about a half hour on this part before going into the Q&A. This is what we need to execute and identify some specific strategies and how they can be executed. The first part here is how we can pay attention to word choice, specifically curiosity and but, as opposed to why and but, and how we use feedback. Inquiry is wonderful, not why. Inquiry is pure, it's humbling, it's transparent, it's authentic. Inquiry is beautiful. Inquiry can be expressed with these 4 phrases, for example. I need to understand. I'd like to know more about. Help me understand, please. I'm curious about. Inquiry makes me feel good. Somebody is interested in what I'm doing. On the other side, we have the why word. Now, I do want to point out, and some of you maybe already react to this, that why is not a bad word. Friends can ask each other why all the time. Why do you want to see that movie? Why do you want to go to that restaurant? Why do you want to do it that way? Friends can do it all the time. Okay. Except why has a risk associated with it. And I'll stay with, why do you want to go out to lunch there? Right? Some people may feel criticized because the word why was used. I could have said, what do you like about that restaurant? And bypassed the potential collateral damage of the impact of a why, because someone was why'd all their life, either by a partner or by a parent or by somebody they thought was their friend. So these phrases tend to create hostility for which the person we're talking to has to overcome in order to answer the question. So as a bottom line, we need to resist the temptation. Now, I want to invite you to experiment with this on your own. I want you to actually do real research, preferably after my presentation rather than during, but find somebody, your study buddy, for example, and ask them a why question. And here's just some examples. Why'd you buy that car? Why'd you pick this job? Why are you using that pen? Any question. And I don't really gamble, but I bet money on this as an expression. They will give you one or two answers. The word why inhibits the flow of information to feed inquiry. When asked why, most people will answer with one or two questions, even as simply as, why did you do it that way? Well, I thought it would be more useful. If instead I ask a question based on inquiry, which is, you chose an interesting approach. I'm kind of curious what the advantages were for this particular approach on this job. Now I'm going to get a paragraph or at least several sentences that help me understand what their reasoning was, instead of a defensive reaction where the person's going to pick whatever they think is the most sellable answer to satisfy my why. And again, I invite you to do your own research. These are difficult things to change. I was coaching a manager who had recently been promoted to a director position. The vice president of the area asked me to coach them because it was her first major leadership positions in the organization. And I think like every other sentence had buts in it, and she was completely unaware of this. And so in a week's worth of time, I asked her to try and stop using the word but. And I met with her and she said, Sean, I've completely purified myself. I don't say but anymore, but sometimes I do. And then again, but sometimes this, and but then this. I said, now you need to bring a friend to a meeting and have them count your buts, because you're unaware, you're unconscious of the words you're using and the impact of other people. Hence again, my invitation for you to find somebody to work with, because we will think our view is wonderful and it may not be. Our friends help us. On the word but, it sometimes shows up frequently during family dinners or business meetings. The intent is honorable. I want to say I have a different point of view. The impact, though, is to signal a criticism of what was said or a dismissal of what has been said and who said it. That's the impact. And it's made worse by power differentials. And so people tend to butt down but not butt up, so to speak. And the greater the power differential, the greater the risk of collateral damage to that person's point of view, their psyche, their self-esteem, their hunger to do a good job. Several alternatives are available. The first one is substitute the word and for the word but. It's a little awkward at first. It even sounds awkward. However, it doesn't have this thing of but in it. Paraphrase the other person said before responding. Say, I want to know if I've heard this correctly before I respond. Ask questions, but not why, to better understand what's going on. And again, be compassionate and authentic, saying, if I understand you, I think you said this. I have a different point of view. Just volunteer that without the but. It's okay for people to have different points of view. That's actually a value-added feature of human beings. It's an important question. I'd like to take a minute to try and answer this question. The first word to show up on my screen is the word trouble. While this is populating, I did receive a question right now. How can we react, defend, or accept when another person questions us with their whys and we feel uncomfortable about it? I'm going to repeat that question as this population grows. We have 100 people signed in. How can we react, defend, or accept when another person questions us with their why and we may feel uncomfortable about it? When someone asks me why, and there are a lot of people that do, I ignore the why, and I'm recommending you do the same thing, and pay attention to their need. So if I were going to paraphrase them, I would not say, so if I hear you correctly, you're asking me why. I would paraphrase. I love paraphrasing as a first response to whys. Say, it sounds to me like you're interested in knowing more about how I did what I did. Or it sounds to me that you're curious about such and such. And I want to really emphasize this paraphrase trick because a physician in training, a second-year resident, asked his teacher and attending in a hospital this question. He said, so Dr. So-and-so, Dr. Smith, would you please give me some feedback about my interactions with this patient when I'm done? And when he was done, the attending turned to him and said, the medicine you ordered could have been improved. And the resident responded with saying, that's not what I asked you for. I asked you for feedback about how well I worked with the family, not about my medicine. I know my medicine's good. Why did you give me feedback about what I wanted to know about? And so misunderstandings are common everywhere we go. And so if we take the why question and say, so it sounds like you wanted feedback about something different than what I was providing for you. Yes, that's true. We move off of the why fairly quickly. If somebody says to me, why did you do it that way? I will paraphrase. So it sounds to me like you're thinking there may have been other ways that could have been equal or better. I want to make sure I understand what you want to know. I'm moving to what their intentions are and trying to skip over the why. Because the more I fix it in the why, the more difficult the conversation is going to be. I'm going to push the notion that this person is honestly interested and they just don't know that they're using a word that has collateral damage. So that's where I'm going to go to first. I hope that gives a useful answer, and I can come back to that when we're done. But I guess the short answer is I ignore the why and pay attention to the need. I may even partially answer and say, well, one of the reasons is, and I'm kind of curious what you're looking for, to be respectful of their initial question. But I've got to get to what their interests are and not stop at the why question. So I've got about 260 responses right now. I've got one small thankfulness, and the dominant word here is fear, curiosity. Joy is a very good competitor for a main screen here. Now you can all see this, so I'm not going to read you what you see. The overwhelming number of these appear to be less than positive things to say to people. Uh-oh is a good answer. Wrong to error. This is a shame. So I'm sad to see this. I'm glad to be here because I hope that I can share some things that will help you change this. The first thing to do to change this, though, is for you to change the way you use feedback with other people and make that contagious in your world. Let me go into the material right now, talk about the strategies. I want to propose to you that feedback is naturally self-correcting or self-improving. We all use feedback to improve ourselves. If I pick up a pen and start to write with it, and it's out of ink, do I keep using it until my supervisor or a friend says, Sean, you have to change pens, or do I self-correct? I self-correct. We all self-correct based on feedback. This concept is dramatically opposed to what other people teach around the world. That feedback is other correcting, that I use feedback to fix you, to help you, to make you better. And I'm proposing to you, it's not true. And I'm going to show you some of the research I used to come to that conclusion and invite you to go there too. We believe that giving feedback is an inaccurate description of what's happening in the moment. And it's disruptive. To the giver, giving feedback feels like these things. I can help you. I know more than you do. Because of my experience, I can show you a better way. To the receiver, it feels like this. I'm smarter than you are. I'm smart, you're dumb. I have power, you don't. None of this is healthy. By becoming conscious how feedback works, we became able to use it more effectively. When a singer uses a microphone on stage and they get feedback from the monitor, they correct themselves. They don't wait for somebody to yell, move away. We pick up a hot pan and burn our fingers. We self-correct. I was briefly describing the red line as the timeline. As time goes by, the utility, the value, the appreciation for feedback declines. In the initial moment or two, or sometimes longer than that, I want to do better. And so any feedback that I receive in that window is reinforcing for me. That's the zone where all feedback is supportive and self-correcting. Once too much time goes by, I become irritated at your offering me feedback and wonder why you didn't give it to me sooner. Zooming into the top half, I want to tell a toilet paper story here. One of my friends was interested in learning how to do this better, and so she made up this story for me to give an example of the timeliness of feedback. At the initial event, she walks out of a restroom in a business office area, dragging toilet paper on her shoe. She sees somebody she does not like, who walks up to her and laughs at her, insults her, and points to her foot dragging toilet paper. And their intent is to be hostile, but she sees it as self-correcting feedback, as useful. She's glad to know now instead of later, before she walked through all the offices carrying it. So whatever reactions we get, whatever feedback we get real time, helps us improve, and we invariably appreciate it. Similarly, if she walks directly from there to a conference room and stands in front of a group of 20 people, pacing back and forth across the front of the room, dragging toilet paper on her shoe, if somebody approaches her and says, "Excuse me, I need to talk to you in the hall just before you get started," and says, "Check your shoes," she will be grateful. But instead, if she's allowed to give a 1-hour presentation, pacing back and forth, dragging toilet paper on her shoe, and at the end of the day, at the end of the week, somebody she knows comes up and says, "Oh, by the way, I want to give you some feedback. Last Wednesday, when you gave your presentation, you were dragging toilet paper on your shoe. You might not want to do that again, so check your feet before you go on to present." Now she says, "I just want to hurt that person because so much time went by. The value of the feedback decreased, and now I feel insulted and criticized, and I can't do anything about it to improve." So the timeliness of feedback is critical for it to be improved. And the sooner we get it, the better off we are. Here's some examples. So here's one of my small basketballs. If I take this ball and throw it 5 times, and you walk by me and see me throw it the first time, and the first time misses, and you wave and you keep going. I throw it another time, it misses, and the 4th time it goes in, and the 5th time it goes in, I am now feeling proud. I'm feeling proud. You come up to me and say, "Sean, I saw you playing ball this morning. I want to give you some feedback about the throw I saw." You're giving me feedback about the first time I throw it. How useful is that? I've already gotten feedback from throwing it, and I've already improved. So it's just condescending and insulting to think that your words, taken out of context an hour or 2 later, are going to be meaningful to me. Feedback doesn't work that way. Now what you're doing is you're trying to tell me something, and I'm going to try and listen to you. But please, let's not delude ourselves into thinking it's useful feedback. Feedback is inherently useful. But we want to help somebody improve the performance. That's a different tactic. We're talking about understanding their reasoning for what they do and offering them suggestions and having them try them out. And when they try them out, that's when they'll get the feedback that's reinforcing and will continue to help them improve their performance. So with too much time passes, we move into this other correcting zone on the bottom half, where instead of me wanting to do better, you want to change me. And that's a normal reaction, say, well, you know, I thought I was good before we met. What do you want to change me for? Well, this change thing is a problem. If you want to help me, then don't say I want to give feedback. Say, I saw some things, I want to go over them. I think there's other ways of doing this. I want to show you what they are. So that shows concern. Because when feedback is delayed, there's an increased risk of defensiveness. Now again, people who know each other fine can correct each other all day long and everything's fine. But when there's a power differential and feedback is heavy, it runs a risk of interfering with heartfelt communication. And by being concerned about how the receiver is receiving it, I will choose better words and better timing. One of the people I coached in a large organization, a vice president actually, saw somebody doing something wrong in their work. And she took out a note out of her pocket and was going to make a note to review it at their weekly meeting. And then she realized after this conversation, this very same conversation, that that was not the best way to do this. So she put the note and pen back in her pocket, turned around, walked over to the person, and the person said, oh, yeah, I was wondering if you saw that. Yeah, well, I know I should not have done it that way. Problem fixed. The person made a small mistake. They self-corrected because they knew she was aware of it. She never had to say but or why or try to make them remember something. Because after a couple hours of whatever we're doing, we create our own story. And we're always the heroes of our own story. So your story contradicts my story when feedback is delayed too much. So the hard choice here is be conscious of how feedback works, offering suggestions, guidance, and perspective. Fostering an environment where people seek you out for helpful feedback. They ask for it, in which case now is the best time to give it. We also have another choice. We can choose to use feedback as a disciplinary, demeaning, devaluing control technique. It may work sometimes, but too often it creates collateral damage. In summary, if we can see feedback as an organic part of our human development, as part of the fabric of the organization, as something useful, valued, appreciated, something much more powerful than fear, then we become a community of people helping each other, practicing values of these compassion, collaboration, vulnerability, authenticity, and humility. With this perspective, we strengthen each other and we strengthen the organization. I want to leave this feedback piece with just a few quotes. Feedback delayed is feedback denied. Simple mantra. Another friend of mine called feedback is a dish best served warm. And lastly, participating in feedback is a process best shared real time rather than locked in a box for a few weeks and then used to elevate anxiety, fear, or compliance. In review, talked about the power of words, and there are other words here. These are just really important ones for me, and about how being conscious of how feedback works, especially timely feedback, helps us be more effective and helpful to each other. These were the 4 core things that I wanted to talk about today, and I hope the words that I've said have some meaning for you and are useful to you. By becoming more conscious of our communication, we can identify barriers real time and then reinforce how we can get through those barriers more effectively with other people and use some of these strategies to be effective and elevate the quality of all of our conversations. This is the homework I promised. When you first experience your first impression, don't stop. Look for more than what first appears. Work with your friends to count your whys and buts. Express gratitude more often. However often you may express it, try to express it more often. And one technique is moving 10 coins in your right pocket, left pocket. Every time you express gratitude to somebody, move a coin. And a friend of mine tried that, and it took him almost a week before he could express gratitude or appreciation more than 10 times. The exercise was very helpful for him. Ask someone you work with for feedback. It's very complimentary to be asked for feedback. And talk about your team. And if you're in a stressful situation and someone asks you, why you did what you did or what you want to accomplish. They're paying attention to something that may trigger you. Do not react. Pause. In that pause, think about what you want to accomplish, not what you want to say, and then work towards accomplishing something.
So thank you very, very much for watching this program. I know how difficult it can be to watch an hour or so PowerPoint. I know that's hard, so I appreciate your effort to do that. I sincerely hope that some of the material you actually found useful and things that you can begin right away to try to make improvements in the way you communicate, again, at home or in the office. Now, if you have any follow-up questions, I'm perfectly happy to get them. There's two ways you can reach me. The best way is just directly email seanmahar@aol.com, SEANMAHAR@AOL.com. And if you have any questions about this presentation, just send me the email and it works just fine. Another way to reach me is you can get to me through our website, which is stopwastingwords.com. Just type up stopwastingwords.com, hit enter, and you'll find us. We do have on our website a free 10-question assessment for people who'd like to challenge themselves and see how well you fare in your own understanding of how communication works. So if you do that, I'll get the results and I'll follow up with you if you want any additional support on the reasons between our answers and perhaps your answers if they were different. So feel free to reach out to me, and I wish you well, and thank you again very much for being with us today.